Good morning. Welcome to the second webinar of the FY24 round of the Community One Stop for Growth. On behalf of Governor Healy, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, and Housing and Economic Development Secretary Howe, we want to thank you for joining us today and for your interest in supporting and advancing economic growth throughout the state. This is our second webinar of a three-part series. A recording of the first webinar, an overview of the One Stop in its entirety, is available to view on the One Stop website for those of you who didn't tune in earlier this week. The third and final webinar in this series is our technology webinar, which is focused on how to use the application portal. Webinar 3 will be pre-recorded and posted directly to the One Stop website on February 7th. We invite you to submit your questions through the Q&A function on your screen. Again, questions will be aggregated and responses will be posted in an FAQ document on our website. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Ashley Stolba, and I serve as Undersecretary of Community Development at the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development. With me again today is Juan Vega, Assistant Secretary of Communities and Programs, and Pat Shannon, our Community One Stop Coordinator. The purpose of today's webinar is to guide you through the One Stop application and help you understand where your projects fit within the One Stop development continuum. We'll start with a review of the important topics covered in our first webinar, and then dive into an explanation of how your projects fit within the development continuum with a series of example applications based off submissions from last year's round. Finally, we'll wrap up with a summary of key takeaways and next steps. So with that, I have the pleasure, I'll turn it over to Juan Vega.
Great, thank you very much, Ashley, and good morning to everyone. And thank you again for joining us for the webinars for the Community One Stop FY24 round. As Ashley mentioned, we'll go through, to start this webinar, we're just going to recap a few things we covered in the first webinar. And primarily, I want to focus on the programs that are included in the Community One Stop for Growth that we run in collaboration with across 3 state agencies. The Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development has the MassWorks and the Urban Agenda programs. The Department of Housing and Community Development brings the Community Planning, Rural and Small Town Development Fund, Housing Choice Grants, and Mass Downtown Initiative. And then finally, Mass Development has brownfield, site readiness, underutilized properties, collaborative workspaces, Commonwealth places, and real estate services technical assistance. You can visit the program websites to view the respective program guidelines, as well as sample application templates for each, showing the questions that are going to be specific to each of those programs. Next, we want to just go over again and recap the development continuum, which is a critical component of the One Stop and the way to think about the way how the application is organized. It represents essentially the life cycle of any major community development project, from the initial stages of bringing together stakeholders and community visioning, putting together plans, all the way to actual construction. As applicants, you should look at the development continuum as a guide to where your project might fit along that continuum in order to try to submit your full application kind of at the right spot to ensure that the right programs are going to be evaluating your application. And pretty much all projects submitted through the One Stop will fit in one of the categories along this development continuum. And it's broken up into 2 broad groups. On the left hand, we have the categories that we consider preparing for growth, which are usually elements of initial work being done by the community to prepare itself and position itself to be able to attract private development or be able to build a bigger project. And on the right-hand side is where the funding is, the larger grants in most cases, to be able to actually carry out the construction work. Next, I want to just dive in as we did in the first webinar. Before we discuss, I wanted to talk about the preparing for growth categories and to explain essentially the breakdown. As we mentioned in the first webinar, each of the categories is now split into 2 subcategories that we refer to as project types. And under each project type, there's a bulleted project focus list, which is what you will serve as a specific description of the project scope that you are proposing. And each project's scope focus in turn is then associated with a specific program or a primary program that is going to be able to evaluate and determine whether they'll be able to recommend a grant to the project. And we will be diving much deeper into each of these in this webinar. Categories related to preparing for growth include the community activation, placemaking, planning and zoning, and site preparation. And then grants provided through these categories support activities and initial steps by community-based actors and stakeholders to attract and guide private investment in the community. This could include creating a business improvement district or implementing a placemaking project to attract businesses to the area, developing a municipal master plan to guide development, or conducting the preliminary site work needed to attract private investment to a specific site or lot. And then next, the catalyzing specific projects categories, again, broken down into two project types, and then project focus will have the applicants looking for funding to support the implementation of construction activities that may leverage private investment, leading to new commercial, industrial, and or residential development, as well as any other improvements that the community has laid out in their visions. The buildings category supports vertical construction generally, including rehabilitation of blighted structures and the build out of new collaborative workspaces, for example. While the infrastructure category supports the construction and renovations of publicly owned horizontal infrastructure, such as roadways, water and sewer, electric utilities, things like that. And then next up, I just wanted a couple of highlights in terms of important changes that have been made for the FY24 round. First, applicants will now only select one development continuum category associated with their project. It is very rare that a project truly spans multiple categories. So limiting the selection to one category better focuses your application and keeps applicants from spending unnecessary time completing additional questions. And then the second big change is that the community capacity building category has been renamed to community activation and placemaking. And this change was made to better represent the types of projects that would be funded under this category and to clear up any confusion caused by the way it was described before. And then next, finally, the final topic for recap is the application, the full application itself, which is the vehicle by which applicants will actually request grant funds for a specific project. And the full application, which is currently open, is broken down into 5 primary forms. The first form is where we will ask about the applicant itself, providing information about the organization that is applying, the organization type. Form 2 is where it's made up of all the information that all programs, regardless, is the name of the project, brief description, anticipated outcomes, the scope and budget. This is also where you will actually select the development continuum category, the project type and project focus, which will then populate or actually lead the rest of the application. Form 3 contains the development continuum questions. So depending on those selections in Form 2, you will then be prompted to answer questions related to that category. And it'll be populated with one of the categories based on on what you selected in Section 2. Then Form 3A has been developed as kind of where the special designation questions will live. And this form contains questions specific to the Housing Choice Grant Program and the Rural and Small Town Development Fund. And so it will only be available to applicants that are as such. And they'll be able to, there'll be an opt-in. You need to choose to complete the section is required, considered for funding those programs. Form 4 contains a certification of application submission. should be self-explanatory there. It's a signature page certifying that the individual submitting the application has the authority to do so on behalf of the organization, and be completed CEO of the organization or an authorized official. And then finally, Form 5 allows for applicants to upload any additional documents requested in the application. And in order to submit a full applications, applicants must complete the applicant information form, project information, development continuum, and the certification. Again, applicants seeking funding from the Housing Choice or Rural and Small Town programs will also need to complete those additional special designation questions. I will now hand it over to Pat to review a series of project scenarios and walk us through and discuss how the applicants would actually apply within the one-stop.
Great, thanks, Juan. So before we jump into the scenarios, I just want to take some time to highlight the single most important question in the entire application, which is question 2.3, the project category for grant consideration. This is where applicants will select the development continuum category that best fits the project being proposed. As Juan noted, this year, we're also asking applicants to identify a project type and project focus. The answers provided to this question will guide the questions that the applicant is asked throughout the rest of the application, and does largely determine which programs will end up reviewing the application for funding. So what are the project type and focus? So as previously mentioned, each development continuum is now broken up into 2 project types, generally meant to separate each section into early stage preparation tasks and then the implementation activities. So we saw a precursor to this last year with the site preparation, building, and infrastructure categories being broken down into pre-development and implementation or construction activities. So in addition to those existing project types that were introduced last year, community activation and placemaking is now split into early stage engagement and action grants. And planning and zoning is divided into community plan and zoning revision. The project focus is a specific description of the scope of work to be completed. Each project focus is tied to a one-stop program, which is meant to help applicants understand which program is most likely to review your application. When you're choosing a project focus, you'll see a pop-up box appear naming the program most likely to review the application when you hover over each project focus radio button in the application. So on the screen here, we have an example of what question 2.3 would look like for an applicant seeking brownfield site assessment funds. So first, the applicant's presented with the 5 development continuum categories. So in this case, since I'm going for brownfields site assessment, I want to choose site preparation. I'm then presented with a project type. So I'm asked to choose either site pre-development or site work implementation. Here, in this case, I want to select site pre-development. This prompts the project focus options to open. And here you'll see site brownfield site assessment, which is ultimately what I'm going for. So when I hover over the radio button, when I'm about to select this, I'll see this pop up in a green box, say generally reviewed by the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund. So I know that that's the program most likely to be looking at my application, and it would be a good idea for me to go and review their program guidelines. All right, so now we're going to dive into the examples. So first off, we have a municipality that is asking for technical assistance to undertake a business improvement district, or as we call BID, feasibility study for the downtown area. So the community activation and placemaking development continuum category has grants that support both technical assistance to evaluate BID feasibility and funds to support the creation of a BID, or again, business improvement district. This applicant is looking to assess the feasibility of creating a BID, and they're not yet ready to take the forms to actually, or the steps to actually form the BID. So this is an early stage engagement activity. So they're going to go for a project type, select early stage engagement, and then for a project focus, they're going to want to select consultant services for downtown. So this applicant would see that in the green pop-up that would appear that this grant's likely to be reviewed, or this application is likely to be reviewed by the Mass Downtown Initiative, or as we call MDI. If awarded, the applicant would receive up to $25,000 worth of consulting services that could be used to conduct a review of the proposed district and potentially prepare an implementation strategy. So the next scenario, we have a municipality that's already conducted a feasibility study and has identified that a business improvement district is a great means to revitalize the area. So now they're seeking funds to implement the bid. So this is a case where the early stage work's already been completed and the applicant's ready to move on to the implementation stage and actually create the business improvement district. So again, the applicant will select community activation and placemaking as the development continuum category. And this time they're going to want to choose action grant as a project type, and they'll select creating district support as a project focus. You can see when the applicant selected creating district support as a project focus, a couple additional options appeared. This will be the case in several of the project focus options across the continuum. Part of our mission with this question was to make sure applicants are confident that they're choosing the correct categories to submit the application through. And so we wanted to get as specific as possible in our response options. So in this case, creating district supports tied to real estate services technical assistance, which can support both the formation of a business improvement district as well as the creation of district improvement financing plans. So this additional set of radio buttons, I'll select business improvement district formation, and it lets me know as the applicant that I'm in the right place. All right, in example 3, we have a request from a community to create a housing production plan to better understand the town's current and future housing needs and to identify strategies to facilitate the development of more housing. So this is a great example of a planning and zoning project. Planning and zoning supports a wide range of planning initiatives, from master plans and urban renewal plans to comprehensive zoning review and revision. This is a housing production plan, which is kind of explicitly listed as a project focus under the community plan project type. The end goal of each project focus within community plan is to create a new planning document. I want to flag that communities seeking assistance with zoning to comply with the multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA communities can request funding through the zoning revision project type within planning and zoning. All right, so in this example, we have a municipality that is seeking funding to develop a plan for the reuse of a former senior community center focused on the feasibility of affordable housing at the property. So this plan would include community engagement and feasibility analysis. So this is a perfect example of a municipal surplus property disposition plan, which is now available as a project focus through the site pre-development development continuum. I'm sorry, through the site pre-development project type within the site preparation development continuum category. Funding for these projects can include site concept plans and site and market feasibility studies, and the development of materials to support a municipality's disposition process and the analysis of proposals to support their decision. Next up, we have a housing choice community that requests funds to conduct a survey, environmental review, traffic impact study, and natural resource evaluation of a city-owned site to support the development of a new 65-acre business park with potential for 800,000 square feet of industrial commercial space. So this project fits in the site preparation development continuum category, as it's a project to improve a specific site in order to attract future private investment. Here we want to select site pre-development as a project type because the community is in the design and engineering phase of development and not yet ready for construction. The city's already identified a use for this land and is conducting the design work that will ultimately lead to site construction. Therefore, the applicant will select preparing for site improvement construction as the project focus, as opposed to municipal surplus property disposition, which is more focused on identifying the best use for a surplus property. Again, you'll see that choosing this project focus prompts an additional level of radio buttons to further specify the project's focus. An additional element of the scenario is that the project is being submitted by a housing choice community, and the budget for the project is within the limit of the housing choice grant program. This means that the applicant would likely choose to complete Form 3A special designation questions so that this project can be reviewed by the housing choice grant program. All right, example 6, a for-profit organization requests funds to fit out an underutilized space that would be used to create a business innovation and co-working center, including interior demolition and refurbishment. So projects with an end goal of creating a new co-working space should generally apply through either the collaborative workspace fit out or collaborative workspace feasibility pre-development project focus areas within the building development continuum category. The goal of this project is to engage in construction to fit out the collaborative workspace. So the applicant will select building construction as the project type and then collaborative workspace fit out as the project focus. Projects that create new collaborative workspace are primarily reviewed by the collaborative workspace program. It's important for prospective collaborative workspace applicants to know that the program does require a one-to-one budget match. Next is a rural community that seeks to evaluate the feasibility of constructing a new fire station that would significantly impact service to existing and future housing stock. In past years, we'd usually say that a project to enhance a municipal building does not fit within the one-stop. However, we did see that there was a great demand for supporting these types of projects. So new this year, communities with housing choice and or rural and small town designation may request funding through the building category to support municipal building construction. Only the Housing Choice Grant Program and Rural and Small Town Development Fund will consider funding these projects. So only public entities in a designated housing choice community or a rural and small town will see this project focus as an option when completing question 2.3. Applicants will also need to complete Form 3A to be considered for funding for these types of projects. In example 8, a municipality requests support to pay for the design and permitting of a sewer line extension to expand sewer services that will catalyze economic development and workforce housing. Excuse me. So here we have a project that will ultimately result in the extension of a sewer line, which fits within the infrastructure development continuum category. The project is still in the design phase and no associated private development has been identified. So the applicant should select infrastructure pre-development as the project type. There's only one project focus under the infrastructure pre-development project type. So the applicant will select pre-construction design engineering documents. In this example, a municipality seeks assistance to fund the construction of a small road and sewer infrastructure that will serve a new development of clustered affordable homes. This project's 90% designed, and both the municipality and the developer have dedicated funds to pay for a portion of the improvements. So now we're shifting gears to the construction side of the infrastructure section. This project is almost fully designed, and the work is clearly tied to private development that will bring new housing. With the municipality and developer both contributing funds to the project, there's likely to be a strong match. Applicants are not required to provide a budget match for infrastructure projects. However, a match generally makes the application more competitive. When answering 2.3, the applicant will want to select infrastructure construction as a project type, and then public infrastructure to support growth as the project focus. Once again, selecting this project focus opens an additional list of more specific radio buttons. In this case, the applicant would likely select roadway streetscape improvements or water sewer infrastructure, depending on which is more prevalent in the project. Infrastructure construction projects without a private development identified will not be competitive for funding through MassWorks. However, there are additional opportunities for communities with housing choice and/or rural and small town designation to receive infrastructure construction funding for projects that may not be tied to private development through either the Housing Choice Grant Program or the Rural and Small Town Development Fund. Next up, an officially designated small town requests funds to enhance the safety of a local roadway that sees frequent accidents. So this is a project that would be eligible through the small town road improvements to enhance public safety project focus within the infrastructure development continuum category. This funding is available to towns with a population of 7,000 or less to address roadway safety concerns, including dangerous road conditions and specific threats such as the imminent collapse of a culvert. Only eligible applicants will see this option when answering 2.3. Please note that any infrastructure construction projects within a small town that do not address road and safety, such as water or sewer improvements, should be submitted under the public infrastructure to support growth project focus. Again, these projects will only be competitive for MassWorks funding if they are tied to new residential or commercial development. So here we have a municipality that would like to request funds to redesign a street with new utilities and streetscape improvements to support a new residential development. The city also wants to develop a conceptual design and cost estimate for site improvements on a city-owned parcel across town to prepare for future private development. So this description includes two separate projects. The first is an infrastructure pre-development project to support development, while the second is a site preparation project to prep a site for private development in a completely separate location. Applicants can submit an unlimited number of applications. However, it's important to remember that each application should only include one project. So in this case, the applicant would complete two applications. The first project, they would select infrastructure, infrastructure pre-development, and pre-construction design engineering in 2.3, and will complete the infrastructure development continuum questions on form 3. And then in the second application, they would select site preparation, site pre-development as the project type, and then preparing for site improvement construction as the project focus. And in that case, the applicant would answer the site preparation development continuum questions on form 3. All right, so in our final example, we have an applicant that's interested in stabilizing a historic structure to make it financially feasible for private development, and is also pursuing funding for HVAC and accessibility improvements to allow for residential development in a second building that is located several blocks away. So here we have another example where an applicant is proposing two distinct projects. Both have similar scopes and would fit in the building construction project type through the building development continuum category, with rehabilitation of a blighted or underutilized property as the project type. However, these two projects are in separate locations, which makes them separate projects and thus requires the applicant to submit two separate applications. So again, any applicant may submit multiple applications. There's no cap on the number of applications that can be submitted, but similar projects within the same project focus will naturally compete against each other. So in this case, we recommend that the applicant consider prioritizing these projects and submitting the project that's most important that they prefer to be funded if one of them were funded. So we just covered 12 out of the many possible project scenarios that come across the one-stop. So you may be asking yourself, where does my project fit? The best way to get an answer to this question is to submit an expression of interest. Submitting an expression of interest allows prospective applicants to pitch project ideas and get feedback from program officers before completing their full applications. We've made some improvements to the EOI form, the EOI feedback form for FY24 to make the feedback more focused and better organized. If your project is a fit for the one-stop, we'll provide explicit instructions for how to complete 2.3 and just to make sure that you're applying through the correct categories. Each organization may submit one expression of interest form in the FY24 round. The expression of interest period opened on December 14th, 2022, and will close on March 17th, 2023. All forms may include up to 2 project proposals. Excuse me. However, forms submitted by 11:59 p.m. tomorrow, February 3rd, are allowed to include a total of 5 projects. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Juan.
Great. Thank you very much, Pat. So at this point, we want to just kind of summarize some of the items that were presented today. We want to highlight that the Community One Stop for Growth is intended to boost accessibility for state guidance and partnership and improve alignment of the various funding programs across the 3 organizations, and to reduce administrative burden on communities, as well as supporting strategic project planning. Similar to past years, applicants may have submitted multiple grant applications associated with a single project. And applicants to the Community One Stop for Growth need to apply only once. And so this is a key element here, right? So you would have normally had to submit multiple applications and multiple deadlines to multiple agencies. And so the idea here is that you're able to submit that same project once and have it reviewed potentially by multiple grant programs that would potentially be a match to be able to fund the project. And then again, applicants should select a single funding type on the continuum to really hone in on the and ensuring that the folks that are going to be reading and evaluating these applications are the ones that actually represent the programs that most closely match with your project. And we certainly will continue to stress that applicants should submit only one application for each project. At this point, we'd like to move into some of the frequently asked questions. And again, we encourage everyone to submit questions through the Q&A function here in Zoom. And there is a lot of, we do have a lot of questions. So we'll try to address these as best we can in the time we have. So we'll start with just some general questions that we tend to get a lot. Essentially thinking about projects fitting in more than one category. At this stage, the best course of action we would recommend is to submit an expression of interest and outline those projects and give the project team leaders the opportunity to provide the feedback based on your descriptions. It's important to understand kind of what is the overall goal that the community or the organization is trying to achieve, and then describing the projects briefly, and we'd be able to provide written feedback. And so essentially that, you know, at this stage, the expression of interest is the best course. And generally speaking, as has been presented today, each project is really most likely going to fit in one category. There's very seldom any cases where there truly is a project that straddles multiple categories. Next, we get a question about, I have 3 projects I want to submit to the One Stop. How many applications do I submit? This is a question about whether there's a limit to the number of applications. And the answer is absolutely not. There is no limit to the number of applications that a single entity or community or organization can submit into the One Stop. And however, as mentioned, each project should be clearly and discreetly defined and submitted on its own application. What we do say is certainly there's no limit to the number that can be submitted. And we have seen, and you can look through the website where we post all of the past awards, there have been entities and communities and organizations that have in fact received multiple grants in the same round for various projects. So we certainly encourage that if you have projects that you feel are going to be competitive. The next question we have is, we're considering submitting 2 applications for projects that fall within the same development continuum category. Is this allowed? And so first of all, these would be 2 discrete projects, 2 discrete applications. And so the technical answer is yes, that's certainly allowed. But what we do want to stress is that applicants really need to prioritize when there are similar projects, because essentially each application will compete against each other, as well as with all the other applicants in that category. And so a good way to judge, for you to judge whether whether you have multiple projects that are on the same project focus, is to really look at, if it ends up being the same continuum category, project type, and then focus, be mindful there is no limitation. You can submit them. However, be mindful that they will compete against each other. And there are programs, you should look at the guidelines. There are programs that specifically limit 1 grant per applicant per round. So it's important for you to understand what program you're likely to be reviewed by, and understand what those limitations might be. Okay, moving into the Q&A, we see there's a question here that I wanted to address right away, and it's, do we need to register for a SAMS number even to apply for the EOI, or do we need the SAMS number when we do the full application? And so the answer is no, you don't need the SAMS number in either case. And the SAMS number is an element in IGX that is put in there when you go to register your organization for the first time. We want to stress it is an optional step. You could type in just a bunch of zeros if you prefer, just to kind of move it along. It won't stop you from submitting your registration. And there is no requirement. The SAMS number is a unique identifier used when applying to federal grants. And the IGX system just has it as a default. And so it is not required to participate in the one-stop. The state programs involved in the one-stop do not require it. If you have a number already for SAMS, you're more than welcome to type it in. That's fine. But usually it's just used by the IGX system to collect the data more easily if you already have a registration. But and we also want to stress, no one should be paying to have a registration number set up in SAMS. On the federal website, if you are interested, there are steps. It's a free process. It's an easy process. You have to submit some materials, and you'd be able to get a SAMS number if you need it. But you're not going to need it for the EOI or the full app or any of the grant programs in the one-stop. We have another question that asks, can letters of support be included in the other documents upload? And so we mentioned in the structure of the one-stop application, the full application, there is a spot where we invite other attachments. I will note, however, that within the full application, there are built-in required attachments that you'll be asked depending on the categories that you're working in. And we do want to be to stress that folks should be very mindful of what that's requesting to ensure that you're submitting things that are responsive, that are going to help the readers in their evaluation of the application. Support letters, general support letters certainly can be attached in the other documents section. We will just I would just be mindful that these are not required elements of the application. They will be looked at and taken into consideration as the evaluation goes on, but they will not be evaluated formally as part of the evaluation of your application. Okay, let's see. So we have a question here. I have 3 potential projects potentially, but won't be able to submit the public interest until next week. Is that going to be a problem? I see that 5 projects have a deadline tomorrow, but is 3 okay to submit next week? So what will happen is after, as was mentioned by Pat, after tomorrow, the IGX system will just limit it. You won't have the opportunity to submit a 3rd project. You're only able to submit 2. What we would suggest in that case is to submit the 2 that you feel you need the most guidance on. And as I think we mentioned in the first webinar, not having something in an EOI does not preclude you from submitting it in a full application. It's not the EOI process is really just to get some feedback before you start working on the full app. It doesn't limit anything you submit in an EOI, doesn't lock you into that. You may decide after getting the feedback that it's not as strong a project as you thought, and maybe you're going to wait until the next round. So unfortunately, the system is set up so that it will, after tomorrow, it will not accept more than 2. And we've set that up to just provide the team enough time, the volume of EOIs coming in, give us enough time to give the feedback before the May 1st submission period opens for the full app. And so, and like I said, in that case, just the suggestion would be to select to the 2 projects that you need the most guidance on before deciding whether to submit a full app. So let's see, each organization can submit one EOI. Can different departments within a municipality be considered an organization and submit EOIs? So the answer, I think, generally there is going to be no. Departments within a municipality are all part of the one entity. The entity is the municipality itself. And so it's not likely that you'd be able to meet kind of the thresholds about authority to submit, et cetera, on behalf of municipality without the actual entity being the municipality. And again, similar to the other question, it's probably not advisable, since those same, if you're submitting applications from different departments, they're all competing against each other, you know, and so the municipalities really would want to focus on the priority projects that you will submit to ensure that those are going to be given the most consideration and prioritized. Let's see, how are changes to funded project timelines handled? In this case, this is, I would say this is a program by program decision at the time. If a project is selected for funding, there will be, you know, all the programs will be issuing letters of award and any conditions that might be related to that program. And most of the programs in the one-stop, you'll find, you know, will need the spending of the project to fit within a certain time frame, usually within the one fiscal year. But I think at that point, there'll be, once you get an award, there will be an opportunity to discuss with the program officer or the contract manager to negotiate those specific details. So that if there is, we do understand that you're submitting your application in June, and getting an award letter potentially in October, and that by the time you're being put on the contract, there may be changes to the actual project. So that's, I think, generally understood in a lot of these projects, especially the construction projects. And so we would say the opportunity to have that discussion about changes in timelines would be once you have the conversation after receiving an award letter, once you're talking to the contract manager and to negotiate that time frame. Let's see, are nonprofits required to partner with a government entity in order to apply to the Urban Agenda program? The answer generally is no. It's not required per se. The Urban Agenda questions, or that section that looks at the Urban Agenda projects, is looking for community collaborations. And so there's an expectation, or I should say, the most competitive applications will talk about how the municipality is involved and the nonprofits are involved, maybe the chamber is involved. And so the bigger the coalition, the broader the coalition, the more competitive the application will be. Having said that, the lead applicant is to be determined locally. So the nonprofit could be the lead applicant. And in that case, there would be an expectation that there'd be at least a letter of support from the municipality showing that there's general support for the project. And so again, there's no requirement one way or the other. The municipality could apply on behalf of the whole group, or the nonprofit could apply on behalf of the whole group. But ultimately, the questions that you will find and the evaluation criteria in the urban agenda program is the stronger applications are going to be those that have broad coalitions or broad-based collaborations. Let's see, we have two questions on MassWorks and private development. So for MassWorks, for infrastructure projects, MassWorks consideration is tied to private development. And how is that defined? And so let's see, we're looking at an intersection improvements project to support pedestrian access near our, I'm guessing this is high school. Would that project not count as it's not private development? Should we identify private development? And if private only, how close should the project be to the intersection in order for the project to count? Okay, so let's see, we need, so I would say generally speaking for the MassWorks project, for the MassWorks program, you know, ultimately the MassWorks is an economic development program. It's seeking to really give municipalities kind of the ability to leverage private development and to promote economic growth, be that in the form of housing, new housing development, or in the form of jobs, increase in jobs. And so there is most definitely the projects that are going to be most competitive in MassWorks are those that are looking to make improvements to public infrastructure, you know, generally speaking, the sidewalks, you know, widening of a road, upgrade to water and sewer infrastructure, you know, replacements of a strategic culvert, things like that, that are necessary in order to ensure that in order to encourage or leverage ultimately a private development nearby, adjacent. Generally, if it's adjacent, that's going to be the most compelling. If it's a road, we've seen projects where there's a big housing development and they want to fix the road leading from there to their downtown. So it's not necessarily adjacent, but there's some direct tie or some correlation that the improvement for the public infrastructure is being done in order to facilitate private investment. And so making improvements such as, you know, ADA, pedestrian trails, things like that, while technically eligible for consideration, generally speaking, they're not going to be as competitive because we don't know what applications we'll get, but in most years that we've gotten MassWorks applications, they tend to be, the ones that tend to be recommended are those that are most tied to either increased housing units or increased number of jobs. And then what level of commitment from a private development is needed to qualify for the infrastructure construction? Do they need to have an approved site plan for a new multifamily housing project? Again, similarly, projects that have private development already identified are going to be the most competitive. MassWorks is very oversubscribed, and so we get a lot more applications than we're able to support. And so there is no specific kind of requirement for a level of participation from the private developer. However, again, if you look at the projects that have been funded in the past, generally speaking, there is certainly a private developer identified. There is a private development that perhaps has some substantial design completed. A project where the private developer has secured all of their financing is going to be stronger than one that's not. So there's a lot of elements that get taken into account in evaluating these applications. But for example, as well, you know, if the developer is contributing to support the public infrastructure improvements as well in the form of a match, while it's not required, applications that include that tend to be more competitive as well. Let's see, we have the next question is about matches and which of the 12 programs in the one-stop, if any, require a project match. It'd be helpful to know now since it's a budget season. Okay. So generally speaking, the majority of the projects or programs within the one-stop do not have a requirement for match. There are two programs specifically that do as a function or element, a key element of that program, and that's Commonwealth Places and Collaborative Workspaces. those are projects that will ask for specific matches in order to evaluate the application. I would say, however, generally for all 12 programs, applications that include, while they may not be required for a lot of them, those that do include a match of some sort or some commitment, either from the applicant themselves or from partners in a collaboration or a coalition, or from the private developers and examples of the infrastructure and building projects. Those will tend to be much more competitive. That's going to be, once the reviewers have made a determination that the project generally is eligible, and let's assume all things being equal, those that do have skin in the game, as they say, will tend to be kind of move up in the rankings, if you will. Let's see, next up we applied for the one-stop about 2 to 3 years ago with an EOI, but didn't ever do the full app. Are we still registered in IGX? And if so, how do we find our ID info? So yeah, if you submitted something to the one-stop in the last 2 rounds, and did it through IGX, you should absolutely still have credentials to be able to log in. There is an opportunity, if you don't remember your password, to request a password reset. And if you don't recall the username and password, you could select the forgot username password link, and that'll give you the opportunity to try to request using the email that was originally used to register. You should be able to retrieve your username and or your password. Okay, looking to see if there are any more questions. I do want to stress the letters of support questions. To be mindful. There's also another element that I wanted to address was in the applications, there are key areas in each of the sections where there is a narrative response required. Usually it's the scope of work that we're asking about, or your goals, etc. And as a general rule, we would say it never works to respond by saying, see attached summary or see attached document. Please remember last year we received 523 individual applications that then needed to be reviewed in a very specific time frame in order for us to be able to respond in a timely way. And while a reviewer may at some point have an opportunity to check, at the moment that they're reading and evaluating your application, if the information is not there, if you're not providing the answers to the questions that are being asked, it is very difficult then to evaluate your application. So it's never a good idea to respond by saying, see attached. Let's say we have a building that currently is underutilized and seeks to install a fire sprinkler system. Our other projects include upgrades to the kitchen and installation of restroom or vent systems. Would these projects all be in the same development continuum? And so the answer is, if it's all in the same building, yes, it would all fit within the building continuum category and be considered one project. Again, these are the types of questions that if be helpful, if in an expression of interest, you provide a little bit of background, a little bit of detail, what you're trying to accomplish, and we'd be able to give you some direct feedback on whether this, in this case, whether this really does fit into one full application or whether it could be multiple. And then finally, I have a question that says, is the presentation recorded? Yes, this presentation is being recorded. It will be posted on the One Stop website, as well as in the next few days, we hope to post the Q&A for frequently asked questions document. So let's see, we'll now want to come to the end of the webinar. Again, we encourage you to continue submitting questions to the One Stop email, onestop@mass.gov. You're always welcome to do that. And we monitor that on an ongoing basis. essentially this, we want to thank you all for joining us today. We'll be posting the recording as has already been mentioned. We will also be posting the third and final webinar in the series on February 7th. That's the technical webinar to kind of talk through about the actual mechanics of IGX and how to navigate and find things and how to, where do you start your full app, things like that. We encourage you to watch the webinars if you haven't watched the first one, as well as these will be posted to be viewed at any time. Please focus on reviewing the NOFA. The Notice of Funding Availability is an important document in this process, as well as the guidelines for each of the programs. It's important to review those to fully understand what will be required. That's how you're going to be able to put forth the most competitive applications. And then finally, submit your expression of interest. It's open now. We have until tomorrow if you want to submit up to 5 projects, but it'll continue through March 17th. And we, each entity is only able to submit 1 EOI and include the projects that they want. And we want, and we will provide the written feedback. And so finally, mass.gov /one stop is the website where you could visit to see all of the updated information on the One Stop. Thank you so much for joining us.